So hello, I'm Allison Creed, as I was introduced, from the University of Melbourne. And my talk today is described as Metaphors Make Thinking Visible in Vocational Guidance and Counselling. So when thinking about my purpose for this presentation, it's based on three things. So the first one for you was to provide a little bit more understanding about metaphors of career. So I'll be giving you some empirical evidence that how students kind of think about or perceive career metaphors, that we've found that they significantly interact with what we call measures of employability. So these are measures of, in relation to career, agency, self-efficacy, and career outlook. The second purpose is to introduce you to a methodological tool, one that is for metaphor identification. We have a few absolute experts here and people who created MIPVU, but I also know within the people attending today, but very much so in the area of vocational and career counselling, this is entirely new. So trying to pitch it as a pedagogical utility in counsellor training and practice. And the last purpose is to raise an awareness of the power of metaphor to mediate both the client, be that the student or graduate, and the counsellor's patterns of thinking, behaviour and beliefs, because this can enhance their practice as well as their research. So everything about this presentation is really focused on students or those recent graduates. And it's in the context of career counselling and that client collaboration, because that's what that process and coming together is about. And I feel it's important because knowledge of student perceptions of career and their interaction with what I'm describing here as measures of employability, they're notably absent in career development literature. And it's an absence despite studies showing that guidance and counselling practitioners make frequent use of metaphors. So the literature over the past 30 years or more is showing career being talked about in terms of a journey, in terms of construction, career as a cycle, for example, career as a story. There are many more. And they're using this to facilitate client and counsellor collaboration. So this is in the process of what we call case-conceptualization, but also, just as importantly, for employability intervention development. This is where you're designing ways to improve employability practices or thinking around students and graduates who are entering the workforce or re-entering the workforce after study. Now, if you haven't come across this word of employability, Bennett et al. 2015 put it very succinctly as the ability to create and sustain meaningful work across the career lifespan. Now, that doesn't necessarily just mean one career, because what recent research is showing that we're very unlikely to have one career. It's more likely that we'll have between 3 and 7 different or offshoots of a career. And most importantly, proactive universities are positioning employability, teaching and support as really central to their career services programs and their academic programs. So what I'm kind of pitching with this presentation is I'm breaking it into two, and I'm breaking it down to looking at the areas of, whoops, sorry, I clicked this across. Whoops, that's mucked us up, isn't it? Where are we? Let's head back, sorry. So it's looking at two journal articles that are fairly recent that I've been involved in with colleagues from two different areas. If you're interested, they're available from the first one, International Journal for Education and Vocational Guidance. This is on the PDF as well, so just the DOI if you want to connect with that, because this is pretty brief what I'm going through. The first article is entitled Metaphors of Career and the Relations to Employability. So what we did, and the we is myself as the metaphor researcher, my colleague who is a vocational psychologist, and another colleague who is an educational statistician. What we did, we measured 16 career-related metaphors. These metaphors we didn't invent, they came from existing literature, again, over many years, and just to try and keep it concise, these were the most frequently cited in the literature. And what we wanted to do was ask students how they thought about career, but which of these metaphors were most salient to them. And we did this just on a Likert scale. This was students and it was also recent graduates. And so once the data was cleaned up, we ended up with 577 participants. And what came out was that the thinking around, or that salience around use of metaphor, was career as a journey. Now with this, it did record the higher score, 62%, sorry. And we also had moderate levels of salience for encounters and relationships, career thought about as a story, and also career as roles. So once we had this first bit, we then went on to do an exploratory structural equation modelling, my statistician colleague, and of those 16 metaphors, it broke this down into 4 factors. Now, I labelled these factors constraint, so metaphors that were linked with, say, being entrapped or struggling or living within constraints. The second one was personal experience, so more humanistic and person-centred qualities. The third was complexity, so there's something that was complex, integrated parts of maybe an unfolding whole. And the last was procedure, so established protocols or systems of meaning making. So very briefly, when we look at the results, and I'll just kind of walk you through very briefly these 4 factors, beginning with the constraint category. So with this category, this is where, just a reminder that career was thought about in terms of career as a prison, as competition, career as inheritance, military-like, and even career as school-like surveillance. And what we found with this constraint category was that it predicted all 3 of the variables related to career. So lower levels of career agency, lower levels of job search self-efficacy, and higher levels of negative career outlook. With the personal experience category, this included career thinking around career as a story, career as a journey, metaphors of encounters and relationships, roles, and even career as resources. We found this personal experience category positively predictive of employability variables, career agency, positive, job search self-efficacy was positive, and also it had negative relations with negative career outlook, meaning your negative career outlook was lowered. So those 2 didn't surprise us that much, but what did surprise us was the next 2 categories, and in particular, the procedure category. So the procedure category was career perceived as career as matching, career as a construction, so building, and career as a cycle. The procedure category didn't significantly predict student scores for any of those employability variables. So we were very surprised at this unexpected result, because in the literature and in our personal experiences and in talking to other career counsellors, these metaphors were frequently used. So from that study, what our thinking kind of, our conclusions kind of, and our big key takeaway was that specifically in the context of career counselling, consideration we believe should be given to using personal experience metaphors. So career is a journey, a story, relationship and encounters. In contrast, the words that I said we found were anecdotally frequently used by practitioners. So matching, thinking about career as a cycle and as construction, as well as synonyms associated with this procedure category, they really need to be, we think, reconsidered in career or employability interventions that target job search self-efficacy. So, for example, thinking about job search activities, if we're talking to students or graduates, in terms of matching your skills with what employers want. We feel that this is less productive than drawing from the personal experience metaphors, simply because we found no significant effects from across this 577 students and graduates. So this is the first study. So we're kind of at the halfway point of this presentation. And the key part of coming into this is highlighting that we can't just rely on our intuition. It's not enough, because it's really important to have that knowledge of how students and our recent graduates, how they understand and how they construct notions of career, because it's really essential for things like when we talk about with students about student transition, so across the years or out into the workforce, career literacy and employability. But it's equally important for career practitioners and education providers, as well as any of those kind of industry or organisational interventions, that they realise that intuition, what they think students are thinking about career, actually has a really direct impact on their employability, but also on that relationship between the client and the counsellor. So the second study that I want to introduce you to, again, British Journal of Guidance and Counselling and the DOI, is titled Metaphor Analysis in Vocational Counselling. It's about moving from intuitive to reliable metaphor identification. Now, again, I had the good fortune of working with another terrific metaphor colleague, Susan Acey. Now, as a little bit of background, I started kind of at the university that I was at, which was the University of Southern Queensland at the time, trying to get some data about how students were talking about their education, their career and their future of work. And I came across from our university a series of online promotional videos that were of individual students, and they were pretty realistic, as in they didn't appear to be overly scripted. And I found out that they generally weren't. Students were just expressing how they were feeling about their university, their education, future career. And I got in touch with Susan and I asked her whether her university at the time had anything similar. They didn't, but she did a bit more research and came across very similar that were, again, promotional videos for the Oslo Metropolitan University. So together, we put together 15 of my promotional videos and 15 of Susan's, and we use the transcripts to analyse, identify metaphor and analyse, and have a look and see similarities and differences. We also decided we wanted to make a really practical demonstration of MIPVU. So again, this was going out to a guidance and counselling journal who would not most likely be aware of MIPVU. And so we wanted to do this on an illustrative sample of student testimonials. And so we used the Australian and the Norwegian videos for this purpose. And in the journal article, we put it together as a case study. Right on time. Thank you. And we've broken it down into just 3 phases. So the first is preparing your text. And again, remember, this was set out, it might be useful for you, but it's specifically focused at people who have never done metaphor identification before, who are very much relying on just intuition. So the Australian and Norwegian videos were downloaded and the narratives of all the students were transcribed. So Australian in English and Norwegian in Norwegian. The next phase was metaphor identification. So all the metaphor-related words in the Australian video transcriptions were identified using the original MIPFU protocol. The Norwegian sample, they were identified using the Scandinavian version. And if you're interested in that, you can find it here. Now, the third phase we introduced in this case study was the actual analysis. So we prepared the text, we identified potentially metaphor-related words, and then we were going to start looking at metaphorical frames or scenarios, and we were using the identification procedure and our understanding of the text so that we could start identifying possibly conceptual metaphors. And this is just taken out of a little sample that I've put in here from this case study. So considering we've got 2 sentences down here, the first is from Allison. She's Australian. She's a 3rd-year Bachelor of Applied Media. And the second is a Norwegian student, Daniel. He was doing a Bachelor of Engineering and in Electronics. So those testimonials from students were from all different disciplines at the universities. And what they're doing is talking about their opportunities that have arisen from education and from university life. So what we identified with the first one was this snippet that we've put in was the university, has given me that opportunity to make friends here. That's from Eliza. And from Daniel, the 3 years I've studied have given me a lot. So in the translated version. So here we identified this word given, but we did so really briefly using MIPFU, where you need to read the text and then determine the lexical units. Again, I'm doing this extremely briefly, so forgive me. You then are using a corpus-based dictionary, such as the Macmillan, and you're looking at identifying the contextual meaning for that word. So we identified to cause a general result or effect. Next, you're identifying the basic meaning from the dictionary. We identified this notion of to give or giving or given being to put something in someone's hand or to pass something to someone. So when we had the contextual and the basic meaning to identify the metaphor, we looked at the contextual meaning and we found that we believed it contrasted with this basic meaning. And the relationship between the two, the contextual and the basic, could be viewed in terms of a comparison. So meaning we can understand the transfer of something abstract, so opportunities, for instance, in terms of a physical transfer of something concrete. So we marked it as potentially metaphorical. Once we came down to that stage of analysis, we used this understanding and we proposed that education is an action. This was where the entity of the university or an even more abstract entity of education is actually performing the action of giving. And it's doing so via relationship building, so networking, for instance, and also by study at the university. So conducted during these university experiences of these students. So for Susan and I, looking at this, we really thought our key takeaway, apart from offering a case study and a really practical introduction to MIPFU, From our study and our findings, looking at these Australian sample of students and Norwegian sample of students from these promotional videos, was that metaphor identification, it facilitates access to situational and context-specific meanings, and it informs metaphor analysis. So beginning with that text analysis, going on to metaphor identification, and then being able to use that to inform metaphor analysis, whether that be looking at frames, scenarios, as well as that metaphor analysis for career and guidance counsellors, serving to raise awareness of presumptions or ways of thinking that may otherwise go unnoticed by this group because of their conventional use, which is most common. Now, some concluding thoughts about this, because I was fortunate, unlike as Ulrika pointed out, she found she had less time. I found I had more time. So I want to just do some concluding thoughts at this point. 3, principally, that metaphor awareness for all of us, but specifically for this group in vocational psychology, so career guidance counsellors, it enables, we hope, a conscious shift because of this awareness in both perspective and recognition also of the similarities or differences between various worldviews. And it fosters reflection on perhaps outdated or even unhelpful ways of being or communicating. So if you think back to looking at those procedure metaphors that are very commonly used, so talking about career in a counselling relationship in terms of matching, in terms of taking you through those building or construction, and also as a cycle, may not necessarily be as helpful as we have thought in the past. Whereas personal experience metaphors, a journey, a story, roles and resources, are more salient for students and picking up on their use in those counselling sessions. So just being aware of not your own, but others' metaphors. The second is, in terms of my thinking and that of my colleagues, is that metaphors of career may be also used interchangeably. So it's not just being stuck with one. And using them interchangeably to help us think more flexibly, basically, as well as to evoke or subdue feelings towards student change and transition during their years at university, but also graduating and going out into the workforce. And thirdly, metaphor identification and application very much can facilitate the, well, yeah, I think this is the part that really, for us here, I probably don't need to really restate, but we do know that that identification and then that application, it can facilitate, it can adapt, and it can also motivate attitudes, but also bearing in mind that beyond attitudes, it's also our behaviours for our current actions and also our thinking towards, in terms of career, our future goals and our hopes. So I'm ending just a little bit, if I can move me down here so I'm out of the way, a little bit earlier. My hope at this point is, I'm just going to open this up, is that you all have a phone, and I have to say in Australia, and I know in China, that you're all extremely good and very familiar with QR codes. And since most of us have to check in everywhere now before we even enter a premise, I just want to invite you to have a think about what you actually think about career. So I've got a little task, and that's where I'm thinking of putting us. I know it's been a long day. I was looking at our recording and it's well over 7.5 hours, which you can probably hear in my voice. So I wanted to refresh you, and I wanted to connect you with other participants. So if you would bear with me, I'd like to ask you, even close your eyes, consider what you think or what you see or what you actually feel about career. What these QR codes are about is a Padlet. And when you go onto that Padlet, which is available in most countries, if you can't connect to it, don't worry. Some of you may just have to do a little bit of a sign in. It's just a little task, a little activity for you to just go into there. If you've already gone onto it, you'll see a little circle on the right-hand side, a pink circle with a plus. When you go into that, you can click on it and you can actually put in the place that either you were born or place that maybe you spent most of your life or early years growing up. It'll search for you. It'll provide a little pin for you that you can go in and have a look at. I'll actually see if I can do I'll do a new share in a minute. It's not coming up, but I might even be able to show it to you on my phone, mightn't I? If I scan it, we'll see if you can see my phone. So what this is, you'll also, if you're in there already, you'll be able to see other pins, okay? So some other people, this was through a RAM conference, that people started putting their ideas about how they think about career. I would ask you not to click on those pins just yet so they don't influence your thinking. But on my phone, I'm wondering whether, no, you're not going to be able, oh yes, you can. There you go. That's what it comes up and looks like on my phone. It's got all the countries. Can you give me just a thumbs up if some of you are actually already in there? You can do it virtually through the chat down the bottom. Winnie will probably be able to see maybe the thumbs up as well. So this is just writing a really short one sentence, career is to me, or career is like, or when I think about career, pop that in there. I'm going to have a look at the chat to see whether, yep. And have a little go. Can you see this screen, Winnie, that I've just put up?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, so this is the Padlet one. Has it switched for me? Winnie?
Sorry?
It says the career map, Allison.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's what I'm after. So we switched off my slides. All right. So what I've kind of got up here is what will come up for you if you're already in there. This is where you put your place name. So if I'm in Melbourne, if I had actually been born in Melbourne, I could put Melbourne in here and it'll take me there and it's going to drop a pin down for you. Once you get that little pin, it'll give you a little box and you can quickly put what do you think about career. Why I'm doing this is because once you go and you click on other people's and have a look, as we're all metaphor people generally sitting here, you're going to actually start looking at some of the interesting ways that people, describe career and start getting a little bit of an inkling about how interesting it might be to analyse your own and metaphors of career that others have created.